Yeah, that does it be quite yeah, yeah. And there. I got you're right there. And then
Ms. Simons, can you hear me okay? The court office has just gone to get the coroner now.
But we can't hear them.
We can't hear you, but I think, is that you, Beck? Are you going to, oh. Sorry, Luana, we can't hear you. Is there something, might you be muted?
We're not muted now.
Okay, we can hear you now, thank you. All stand. The Coronial Court
I'm supposed to.
Please be seated. Ms. Simons, before the break, I was asking you about the phone call you got from, the second phone call you got from Ms. Gill, that is the phone call after the joint telephone call, where she advised that a decision had been made to withdraw the staff for the weekend and that Yullamu would cover Yundamu. When Ms. Gill advised you that a decision had been made to withdraw the staff for the weekend, did she tell you who had made that decision?
I don't recall that she said so at that time.
Have you subsequently come to learn who was responsible for the decision making?
Dave Reeve.
At the time when she called you to tell you that the decision had been made to withdraw staff, what you record at paragraph 109 is the staff had been asked by Helen to inform as many community members as possible, as well as local police, of the decision and the contingency arrangement with Yullamu. When were the staff asked by Helen to inform as many community members as possible?
I'm not sure about that. I understand she contacted the nurse who was holding the after-hours phone.
Who was that?
I believe it was Cassandra Holland.
So in terms of the discussion you had with Helen Gillow after the mid-morning meeting, did she say to you anything about contacting community members?
No.
Did she say to you anything about contacting local police?
No.
Did she say anything to you about how the community would be told, if at all, about the decision to leave?
No.
Did she ask you to do anything in terms of informing the community?
No.
And did you yourself then do anything, give any instructions to the nursing staff about how the community would be informed?
No.
So you're based in Alice Springs at the time, and were you on duty?
No.
Given your role, however, as management, did you give consideration to how the community would be informed at that time?
Definitely, yes.
What was your view as to how the community should be informed?
I thought it would be a very difficult task given the population. I understood that as many community members and elders would be notified verbally.
How did you understand that as many community members would be notified verbally?
Well, it was my thought. I gave no direction. It was just my thought that as many community members would be told verbally.
That was just an assumption that you made at that time, is that right?
Correct.
Why did you make that assumption?
I did not see that there would be any other means to do that.
Did you think it was important that the community was informed that the clinic staff were not going to be there over the weekend?
Absolutely. As many as could be notified, yes.
Do the elders have telephones?
Ms. Simons?
Yes, they do.
And is that a way of communicating with elders to give them a call and let them know what's happening or ask them to meetings?
That was a possibility if we had the correct phone numbers for the elders.
Was there, to your knowledge, at the clinic, were phone numbers for the elders available?
No.
By 2019, you'd lived in the community for about 6 years. Did you have the personal phone numbers of a number of elders?
Yes, I did.
Did you have Eddie and Lottie's number?
Yes.
And Otto Sims' number?
Yes.
And Robbie Robertson?
Yes.
Did you give consideration to calling any of them yourself at that time?
No, I did not.
Did you tell any... I withdraw that. At any time, was there any discussion as to whether or not any of the elders would be contacted by phone?
No, there wasn't.
Do you think in hindsight there should have been an effort to contact a number of elders by telephone?
Absolutely. Yes.
This decision for the clinic staff to move out for a period of time was unprecedented in your experience. You agree?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it was a very serious decision. Do you agree?
Absolutely, yes.
And it had consequences of leaving the community at risk of being uncovered, that is not covered, not provided for if there was an emergency. Do you agree?
I understand the contingency plan was for Yullamu to accept the emergency calls.
Sure, but that still created more risk, didn't it, for the community than having a clinic available in Yullamu?
Yes. Yes, it did.
Given that, in hindsight, do you agree that insufficient consultation occurred with the community before the clinic staff moved out?
Agreed.
At around 6:30 p.m. in the evening, staff who'd been withdrawn from Alice Springs all met for dinner to debrief on the events in Yullamu from the night before. Did you attend that dinner with them?
Yes, I did.
What was the nature of that? Well, I would draw that. What was discussed in the hour before you got the phone call from Sergeant Frost at 7:30?
Well, the staff meeting at Juicy Rum was just to make sure that everybody arrived safely, that everybody had accommodation, and that everyone was feeling okay.
Were there any discussions during that hour of the concern for the community?
Not that I recall specifically, no.
At any time during the day, that is from the mid-morning meeting through to 7:30 p.m, Did any of the clinic staff express concern for the community that they would not be covered by nursing staff adequately?
Not that I recall. The conversation was that Yullamoo would take the emergency on call.
At the mid-morning meeting, did Dr. Rosser express any concern about how the community would be catered for?
I don't recall.
Do you think, looking back on this in hindsight, that there was insufficient concern given to the risk created for the community of not having clinic staff based in Yullamoo?
Yes.
At around 7:30 p.m, Sergeant Frost phoned the Yullamoo on-call mobile phone, and Cassandra was in possession of the on-call phone. Cassandra answered the call and handed the phone to you. So you were seated with her at dinner at that time, is that right?
We weren't seated.
I see. So you were with her though at that time, with Cassandra?
Correct.
What did Sergeant Frost tell you at that time?
She just said that she needed help immediately.
Did she say anything else?
No, she didn't.
In paragraph 111, I think you say there, Sergeant Frost told me that a shooting had occurred in Yullamoo. Did she tell you that during that phone call?
Yeah, actually, yes, she did. She said there'd been a shooting, but she had no details.
She told you that they needed urgent medical assistance?
Correct.
And you told Sergeant Frost that there were no staff presently in the community?
I reminded her that the staff weren't in the community, yes.
Was there anything else that was said during that phone call?
No, I just advised her that Yullamoo was providing the emergency on-call cover.
When you heard that Sergeant Frost say that there'd been a shooting in Yullamoo, how did you feel?
Oh, very distressed. Yes, there'd been a shooting. I didn't know any other information, who had shot who, and whether that person was still alive.
Did you have any understanding at any time prior to 7:30 p.m. that night that the immediate response team, or IRT, was being called in to assist police?
No.
Had you ever heard of a team within police called the IRT?
No, not until this time.
At any time prior to 7:30 p.m, did you have a discussion with police about the arrest of Kumanjayi?
No.
Did you have any understanding prior to 7:30 p.m. that additional police resources were coming into town as a result of the break-ins?
No.
Were you aware of a funeral that was taking place on the weekend, or on the Friday and Saturday in November?
Yes, I was.
How did you come to be aware of that?
It was planned, so I knew of this before I left community.
And before you left community, was it your understanding that nursing staff were going to be of any assistance to the community for that funeral?
Yes, as was normal practice, yes.
What assistance would be given by clinic staff?
It was normally, if it was a weekend, it was the on-call staff that provided that assistance. It just meant opening the morgue and providing the family with assistance out of the morgue.
And did you have an understanding of before you left community, of the day that the funeral was planned for?
Yes.
What day was it planned for? Did you understand?
My understanding was it was planned for Friday, and then it was changed till Saturday.
Who told you about that?
The funeral,
Yes.
the change of the funeral.
Firstly, the funeral, and then secondly, the change.
The notification of when the funeral is happening, that just comes from family members. So they let us know when the funeral is planned.
Was there any specific family member you spoke to, or did you find about it indirectly?
Not that I can recall specifics, no.
Did you understand before you left community that it would be important for the family to have access to the morgue so that they could proceed with the funeral?
Absolutely, yes.
And that if the family did not have access to the morgue, that would be extremely disruptive for the funeral, correct?
Absolutely.
When there was a discussion mid-morning with Helen Gill about the clinic staff moving out, was there any discussion about the funeral taking place?
I think there was, yes. I don't recall the specifics of the conversation, but it was mentioned, yes, that there was a funeral happening in the afternoon.
Do you recall a discussion as to how the community members would be assisted by clinic staff?
Not specifically, no, just that the family would be notified.
Whose responsibility was it to notify the family?
I think that went to the staff members that were first on call, that were on call for that day.
You said earlier that you made the assumption that as many people in the community would be told about the decision for the clinic staff to leave. Who did you assume would do that?
Initially, I thought it would be to the on-call staff.
Who were they?
My understanding it was Cassandra Holland and John Elting.
You were their boss effectively, is that right?
Yes.
Do you think, taking the lessons from this tragedy, that you should have taken more time to instruct them and discuss with them how the community would be informed?
Yes, I accept that. However, Helen Gill was my superior, and my understanding was that she directed.
All right. We can ask her about that. Do you agree that there was a particular sensitivity of the clinic staff moving out in circumstances where they would be assisting the community with a funeral on Saturday afternoon?
My understanding was that staff would stay until the family were able to do what they needed to do.
After the phone call with Sergeant Frost at 7:30 p.m. when you were told of a police shooting, and you
was told of a police
I withdraw that. When you were told of a shooting, and you reminded Sergeant Frost that there were no staff present in the community and Yulamu Health Centre was covering, what did you do?
I then made a phone call to the on-call manager, that was Helen Gill.
You told her that Sergeant Frost needed urgent assistance, is that right?
I told her that I'd received a phone call from Sergeant Frost and that she was requesting emergency assistance for a shooting.
Helen said she would ring police and confirm what happened, correct?
Correct.
And then a few minutes later you received another call from Sergeant Frost.
That's correct.
What did Sergeant Frost say in that call?
She again requested assistance.
Did she tell you anything else about what had happened?
I asked her if she could give me any details, and she said police have shot a community member.
Did she tell you which community member?
No, she did not.
You told Sergeant Frost that you would contact Medical Retrieval and Consultation Centre and provide them with Sergeant Frost's phone number, is that right?
That's correct.
What is that service, the Medical Retrieval and Consultation Centre?
It's a service that's been set up for nurses to contact in the event of an emergency or in the event of staff requiring further consultation with a medical person.
You then phoned Helen Gill, is that right? And you told her about the second phone call with Julie Frost?
Correct.
Did Helen Gill tell you what she was going to do in response?
No, I can't recall.
After that phone call, you had no further involvement with the events unfolding, correct?
That's correct.
Did you speak at all with the nurses based in Yullamu that night?
No, I did not.
Did you attempt to contact them at all?
No, not at all.
Can I just ask this question? You told Sergeant Frost that there were no staff present in the community, but that doesn't appear to be correct because the Aboriginal practitioners had not left the community, as I understand it.
Correct.
Were they normally involved in call-outs after hours?
No, they weren't.
Never?
No, they weren't.
And do you think that the senior Aboriginal health practitioner may have had some experience that could have assisted?
That's a possibility, yes.
Did the senior Aboriginal health practitioner was Nola Fisher? Did you have her phone number?
Her phone number would have been on the on-call phone, yes.
At the time, did you give any consideration to asking someone to get in contact with Nola?
No, I did not.
Given her clinical skills, do you think that you should have done?
That's very difficult, and I think Nola would be the only one that could answer that question, whether she deemed that she would be able to assist.
But you know that she was somebody of considerable experience, correct?
That's correct.
And she had some clinical skills, correct?
Correct.
And it's fair to say, isn't it, that if you think of yourself as a family member, you would rather somebody with some clinical skills who is Aboriginal than nobody there, particularly in terms of comforting somebody.
Oh, absolutely.
And for that purpose alone, in terms of giving comfort to the person who had been shot, it was appropriate to consider any clinic staff who were available in the community.
Absolutely.
And in hindsight, it's clear that that should have been done. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Is there any reason why the Aboriginal staff didn't have keys to the clinic?
Historically, they've never carried keys.
Why not?
I'm not sure of the reason.
Ms. Simons, you returned to the community on the 12th of November 2019. Prior to the shooting of Kumanjayi, was there any discussion with clinic staff as to how long they would stay out of the community?
Yes, we did have a meeting while we were all in Alice Springs. That was convened by David Reeve, who just was able to give us some information about what was happening in the community and how we would return.
Sorry, was that prior to Kumanjayi being shot?
No, post.
So if I could just stick with that earlier, with that time frame, between the mid-morning meeting about the clinic staff leaving and you finding out that a community member had been shot, was there discussion as to how long the clinic would be shut for?
Not to my knowledge.
given that this was unprecedented in your experience, did you have any idea yourself as to how long the proposal was to shut the clinic?
No, I do not.
So in assuming that community members were being told that that the clinic was being shut, you assume that they would just be told that it was being shut for an indefinite period?
I didn't give any consideration to the time that the clinic would be closed.
When you returned on the 12th of November, you found that your house had been broken into again, so had the house next door, correct?
Correct.
And when you returned, there was a sense that some people in the community blamed us for Kumanjayi's death, which was very difficult for us. Who is the us that you're referring to there?
Myself and the health centre staff.
And who are the community members that you're referring to?
This was just all community.
How did you get that impression?
From attending the community meeting that was held when we returned.
So when you returned on the 12th of November, when was the first community meeting?
That afternoon.
Right. And how was that arranged?
I'm not sure who arranged it. I think it was arranged by police.
Who was in attendance?
A vast number of community members, police, stakeholders, health centre staff.
Were there senior NT police present?
Yes, to my knowledge, yes.
Do you recall the names of any of those people?
No, I don't. No, if I say Jodie Hobbs, superintendents, commanders, NT police command. I'm not sure of their exact titles or their names.
And where was that community meeting?
At the basketball courts.
And do you have a recollection that a number of Walpurgis community members were verbalising their distress?
Absolutely, yes.
And in some cases their anger?
Absolutely, yes.
You could understand that, couldn't you?
Absolutely.
And you got the impression that there was anger directed towards you personally as the manager?
Yes.
Is that right?
That's right.
Who was that? Who was expressing that?
Individual community members. I can't recall specific names. I can just see faces.
You could understand, couldn't you, why, given your position as the local boss, that anger was directed towards you?
Absolutely.
Can you appreciate, Nurse, how the community felt let down by their clinic leaving in circumstances where there was not consultation with them before it happened?
Absolutely.
Is there anything, there are a number of community members watching, is there anything that you want to say about that and the lessons to be learned?
Look, I speak for myself and, the health centre staff at the time, that we were there with you at the beginning with your loss and we're still here with you now. We'll constantly think about you and what's happened. All I can say is, kia kaha, be strong.
There were a number of conspiracy theories in the community about why the health centre staff had left and the relationship with police. Are you aware that some people in the community think that, in fact, police arranged with NT Health to move out of the community before the IRT came in?
I was aware of that theory, yes.
What do you think about that?
This is so not true.
Can you understand, though, Nurse, why some members of the community would think that when they were not properly consulted about the nursing
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally understand why those thoughts were there. Definitely.
And if there is not proper consultation with the community in these circumstances, do you agree that the relationship between health staff and community can be affected for many years?
Very much so. Very fractured relationships. It's going to take a long time, and a lot of work, and a lot of communication, and a lot of talking to even attempt to mend that.
When you were in Yuendumu for the year after Kumanjayi died, were there meetings with community members where there was an attempt to understand how they were feeling about the clinic being shut for that period?
No, I don't. No, I don't think there was.
Do you think there should have been?
Yes, I do.
Nurse, what you in your statement explained that you have enjoyed your time in remote communities. You're still in a remote community, although a different one now. Why is it that you like community nursing?
As a remote area nurse, I think that we have more autonomy. We have more of an ability to form relationships, therapeutic relationships with people. And it's just work that I find very rewarding.
There are important lessons to be learnt, aren't there, for NT Health from the tragic death of Kumanjayi, correct?
Correct.
And there is important work to be done, isn't there, in restoring the community trust?
Absolutely.
With the clinic? And there are important changes for the community in terms of access to services that you've told us about, particularly in relation to a team of people assisting with trauma, correct?
Correct.
Nurse, I would propose to draft some recommendations for Her Honour's consideration. Would you be willing to have a look at those and lend us your expertise as to whether or not you think that they would be of assistance to the community?
Most happy to do that.
Thank you, Your Honour.
And just before Mr. Mullins, you mentioned that meeting, the large community meeting on your return to Yuendumu, where there was a lot of emotion. And you mentioned various people who were in attendance. Were the Aboriginal community clinic staff in attendance at that meeting?
Yes, they were.
Thank you. Mr. Mullins.
Thank you, Your Honour. Ms Simons, my name is Mullins. I appear on behalf of the Brown, Walker, Lane and Robertson families. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You gave evidence that you were the primary healthcare manager at the relevant time of the Yuendumu Clinic.
Correct.
Were you the sole primary healthcare manager?
Yes.
If you're not on duty, does the person who's most senior become the primary healthcare manager, or do you retain that responsibility?
No, I remain the primary health centre manager. Usually the most senior person will make decisions in my absence.
But in the context of the hierarchy of control, is it the case that there are several aspects of your role that you retain, and you would have an expectation that the most senior member of the nursing staff would contact you before a serious decision is made?
Correct.
The Yuendumu Clinic operated from Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock until 5 p.m, except for Thursdays when it operated till 1 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And at all other times, there were staff available for on-call duties.
Correct.
Now, one of your successors, Sally Hulton, has provided a statement, and she sets out at paragraph 50 of her statement a table of the types of diseases that commonly confront staff in the community of Yuendumu. Now, I'll just quickly read these out to you so we can get some sort of picture as to whether this was consistent with what your experience was. 30% of the health needs relate to diabetes for people over the age of 15 years. Sorry, I should say it's 29.08% is the precise number. Is that about right?
I wouldn't dispute that, no.
At 22.79% relate to chronic kidney disease. That's right.
Wouldn't dispute that.
And the clinic assists in the management of the dialysis treatment for those people.
Purple House assisted dialysis patients.
Did the clinic provide any assistance with that?
Emergency care, yes.
11.73% was cardiovascular disease. Would you dispute that?
No dispute.
All right. And then some of the other diseases included lung disease, mental health disorders, disability, autoimmune disease, chronic infectious disease, rheumatic heart disease, and chronic musculoskeletal disorders. And so they're the type of range of issues that were dealt with by the staff at the clinic on a regular basis.
Correct.
The systems for record keeping at the clinic, was it all electronic?
Yes, it was.
So there were no paper records at all as at 2019?
The paper records were scanned onto the computer system.
So if a patient attended on call and you were on duty, say at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday night, could you access Dr. Amy Ross's records in the clinic itself?
Yes.
And was that access capable of being obtained remotely? So could you access those records from Alice Springs?
No.
Could you access a patient's records? I withdraw that. If you had a patient who came in from Unimu who was seeking treatment in Unimu but was also receiving treatment from Alice Springs, could you access that patient's records from Unimu?
If it was in the computer system, yes.
So is the database, to your knowledge, Northern Territory wide or limited to Yuendamu and Alice Springs?
My understanding is NT wide.
All right. And so if you needed to access it, did you have a login yourself?
Yes, I did.
Now, in the context of handover, was there always a handover between staff changing shift?
Yes, there was.
And was the handover in writing or was it electronic? Or was it oral?
It was verbal.
If a patient was having ongoing treatment, I withdraw that, were there beds at the Unimu clinic where people could stay overnight?
No, there wasn't.
So if there was a need for a person to be treated overnight, did they need to be moved elsewhere?
If they were needing treatment then, and it was for a long length of time, then they were requiring retrieval.
And would that be by air or by road?
Always by air.
And is it the case that there were regular retrievals?
Yes, there were.
Can you estimate how many per week?
No, I can't.
For each retrieval, did a risk assessment have to be undertaken for the particular patient?
No, it didn't.
Now, you mentioned the history of break-ins, and it had occurred over time. Apart from the break-ins that occurred in November of 2019, you're aware that there were break-ins to the shops in Unimu over time?
Yes.
Break-ins to the school?
Yes.
Break into the teachers' houses, I think you mentioned as well?
Yes.
So these break-ins were not uncommon?
No, they weren't.
And to your knowledge, they were mainly children?
I understand from police that it was thought that it was children, yes.
The break-ins that occurred in the week of 6 November 2019 and thereafter, did you or did anybody tell you that there might be an older person involved in those break-ins?
Possibly, but I couldn't confirm that.
When you alerted police about the break-in to your home on the 6th of November, did police officers come around to the house?
Yes, I did.
And they took some photographs?
Yes, I did.
Was one of those police officers Constable Hand?
I believe so, yes.
And the other police officer's name was Constable Smith, Lanyon Smith.
Yes.
Do you remember those two officers coming around to your house?
Yes, I do.
And during the conversation, they had a conversation with you?
I recall the conversation just really about what was missing in the house.
Did they mention during the course of that conversation that they suspected that they knew the person who might be doing these break-ins?
Yes.
And did they suggest to you that it may have been a person who was an older person rather than a child?
Yes.
Did they suggest to you it might have been Kumanjayi Walker?
No names.
Did they suggest to you that it might have been a person who had recently escaped from a correctional facility?
No, they did not.
Did they mention to you that they knew that he was in the community?
I don't recall that, no.
Did they mention it to you anything about that the community might be hiding him?
No, I don't recall that.
Now, you've told Council Assisting about the meeting on 9 November of 2019, and this is the meeting mid-morning where you're attending by telephone. You understand that meeting?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm talking about?
Yes.
And I think Helen Gill is the convener effectively of the meeting,
Yes.
and you have several of the staff from the clinic who are on the telephone?
Yes.
Now, was there any part of that discussion where you recollect it being mentioned that the police had said that they knew who was committing these break-ins?
I don't recall any discussion about that, no.
You didn't raise that by any chance?
No.
Had you raised that with any of your fellow staff members during the course of the preceding days?
No.
You sure that you didn't tell another staff member that the police know who this is?
Not that I recall, no.
There were discussions between you and other staff members about the problem that was unfolding, weren't there?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Look, I withdraw that. Do you remember there being any discussion during the course of the meeting on 9 November about the withdrawal of the nurses sending a message to the community?
Absolutely not.
You say absolutely not. You're very definitive about that.
Absolutely not. No such conversation occurred.
I see. Now, it's the case, isn't it, as you have mentioned, that some staff did not want to leave?
I believe so, yes.
And you suggested that was John Atling and Cassandra Holland.
Yes. Not that they didn't want to leave, that they were prepared to stay.
But wasn't Cassandra Holland a little dogmatic about it and said that she definitely wanted to stay?
I just recall that she said that she would stay.
Now, you also gave evidence that there was... sorry, I withdraw that. The handover to Yulamu. Who was responsible for the handover to Yulamu?
I understand that was Cassandra.
And was she to give an oral handover?
I don't know the details of all the specifics of the handover.
To what extent were you responsible as the PHCM for assisting in the discharge of the handover?
I understood that my superior, my manager, Helen Gill, was directing staff on how to manage the staff withdrawal.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
I wasn't asked to provide any further input or support.
Were you aware that there was a protocol for the withdrawal of staff in circumstances
Yeah.
like this?
I did not know that there was a protocol. It had never happened to me in my career, so I wasn't aware of that, no.
Did anybody, have you discovered that since?
Yes, I have.
Did anybody at the time mention to you what your role was in that protocol?
No.
May the witness please see document 99A, which is the statement of Mr. Reeve, and annexure DR6, which is at PDF page 60. That was very quick. Thank you. Now, we can see there that this is the protocol headed Temporary Withdrawal of Health Service for Staff Safety PHC Remote CAHS Guideline. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And you've said that you are now aware of that this document was in existence at the time?
I'm aware of this, that there was a document. I'm not saying I was aware of this specific document.
Okay, can we just scroll down to the bottom of that page, please? And just so we can confirm that this document, there it is, that just the footer at the bottom of the page there is what I'm searching for. We can see that this is, it's got a temporary title, but the last updated date is 24 April 2018. Okay?
Yes.
All right, now we can see that there's a procedure there,
Yes.
and we can see there under the heading decision making, staff making this decision to leave a community due to serious concerns about their immediate safety is fully supported by PHC management. And then out of this context, local level staff should not be the sole decision makers for withdrawal of service from the community, must comply with any management decision regarding temporary withdrawal of service. So just go on to the next page. And there's the specific considerations for withdrawal of service include, but not limited to. First dot point, are PHC staff safe in the community? Now, you expressed your view, and at that meeting on the morning of the 9th of November, the view was expressed that staff felt they were not safe. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. The next dot point, are PHC staff at risk of harm? And the next dot point, has a documented risk assessment been completed? Did anybody ever ask you to complete a risk assessment in respect of the closure of the Yunamu Clinic on 9 November?
No, they did not.
Did anybody ask you as PHCM whether you had any matters to contribute by way of what you felt might be significant in a risk assessment?
No, they did not.
Do you understand what a risk assessment is?
I think basically who's at risk, people, properties, contingency plans.
Yes, all right. Now, then next dot point, have the police been notified? And the next dot point, logistical support, including appropriate transport and accommodation for PHC staff and families. Just under the next subheading, notifications, we can see under the second paragraph, once a decision to withdraw services has been made by PHC management in communication with PHC health staff, the following notifications should be made at a minimum. And then primary healthcare manager, is that was you?
Correct.
There was no one else in your role at that particular point in time?
No, there wasn't.
PHC management will send documented rationale and plan to reinstate services to the community. Can you see that?
Yes.
There was no plan to reinstate services to community at the time of the withdrawal, was there?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
Nobody asked you about what the plan was.
No, they did not.
What was going to happen on Monday when the clinic reopened and people started to attend for treatment of various types if there was no one there?
I did not have any knowledge about the withdrawal of staff and what the plan was to reinstate.
So let me ask the question again. What did you think was going to happen when people started arriving at the Yuendamu Clinic on Monday morning at 8 o'clock looking for medical attention?
I can't answer that question as I wasn't aware of when the clinic would be reopened.
All right. Look under the subheading then, community. And if we could just scroll down a bit, please, so we can see the entire paragraph there. The PHC management should notify the community by first dot point phone. And you were asked about the telephone by Her Honour. But you didn't contact anybody by telephone yourself, is that right?
No.
The next dot point, a notice advising closure placed on health centre doors and community notice boards. Was that done?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And the notification must include advice confirming alternative service arrangements. Was that done to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge, no.
The next dot point, ensure the message on the health centre telephone clearly provides alternate service arrangements and complies with health centre phones and, I can't see that, e-faxes. E-faxes, thank you. Was that done?
I'm not aware.
Okay. Under the next subheading, primary health care and other services, we can see that there is need for notification by PHC management to all relevant managers, medical officers, outreach staff, etc. And are you aware of whether that was done or was that not within your responsibility?
I understand that Helen Gill was to make those notifications.
All right. You mentioned, thank you very much. You mentioned in your evidence before we took the break, and I'll only be a couple of more minutes, Your Honour, that the staff who were community members and Indigenous, I think you used the term, were not excluded but not included in the meeting of mid-morning of 9 November. That's right?
Yes.
And am I correct to say then the staff that we're talking about are... Give me a moment, please. Nola Fisher. She's one of those staff that
Correct.
were not excluded but not included. Jabison Williams.
Yes.
Another one. Is Jabison a man or a woman?
Male.
Mary Butcher.
Yes.
And Chrissy Marfleet. Was she a community member?
No.
All right. So was it just the three, Nola, Jabison and Mary?
Correct.
Now, when you say they were not excluded but not included, are you saying that you just didn't think about having them join in?
Sorry to interrupt. There is, just for the court's benefit, the witness was not in the community at the time, and there is evidence from other witnesses that were in the community that we will be hearing from about the engagement of local staff. So I'm not sure how helpful it is to take it up with this particular witness who was in Alice Springs.
Well, I guess she's the manager and has contact details and is very well aware of her staff and who was present at the meeting. So I'm going to allow the question.
Thank you, Anna. I asked the question, when you say they were not excluded but not included, are you saying that you just didn't think to include them?
No, I think the reason being is it wasn't their properties that had been broken into.
And so that was the defining issue as to whether they should attend a meeting for a discussion about whether the clinic or whether staff was going to be withdrawn and the clinic closed. That's right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, now, the clinic being closed and the staff withdrawing was going to have a very significant impact upon the community.
Correct.
And at that point in time, and even after the decision was made, there was no plan as to when the clinic was going to be reopened, was there?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Of all the people who could have made a contribution to how this was going to impact upon the community, was it not those 3 Indigenous members that had critical community information?
Yes, I agree.
This meeting was not just about whose house was getting broken into. This meeting was about whether the appropriate thing to do was to withdraw staff from the community and effectively close the clinic.
Correct. I agree.
Are you aware that the Uluru staff, who ultimately took responsibility, including Ms Walcott, at one point thought there was no point in them having the keys because they didn't. Ms Walcott didn't know, had never worked at Yundamu and didn't know where any of the equipment was. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Couldn't the Indigenous people from the community who were your staff have assisted a whole raft of different people in simply navigating the Yundamu clinic?
Agreed. Yes.
They would have known where emergency equipment was, wouldn't they?
Yes.
They would have been able to access the electronic system with passwords and whatnot.
Yes.
So not only were they people who could have given you information about the community, they were people who could have assisted in the maintenance of the alternative plan, that is, placing the Uluru staff in charge of the Yundamu clinic.
Yes.
Was anyone else not included?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
So it was simply the Indigenous community members who are not included in that meeting.
I believe so, yes.
You've worked in New Zealand for many years.
Yes. Yes.
You have worked in communities in New Zealand where there are community nursing members. So I should say, sorry, there are First Nations people in New Zealand who work with communities in a nursing sense.
Yes.
In your experience in New Zealand, it would be unthinkable, wouldn't it, to not include those people as part of a discussion about shutting down medical services in the community?
Agreed.
No, nothing further, thank you.
Mr. Derrick, and again, if everyone can just explain who they are representing, so that assists the witnesses.
Sure. Good morning. My name's Mr. Derrick. I'm from Naja.
You know what Naja is?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Just wanted to ask a couple of questions around Aboriginal employment to begin with. In your evidence, in your affidavit as well, you talk about ways to support Aboriginal employment and health. Would it be fair to say that you recognise the value of recruiting and retaining local Aboriginal staff?
Absolutely.
Yep.
They're vital.
And maybe if you could let the court know why you think they're so vital, in maybe a couple of sentences.
Definitely to enable nursing staff, medical staff, visiting staff to navigate cultural norms, cultural way of being, practice cultural safety. They assist with language and just help non-Aboriginal staff to perform their duties and deliver the service.
Thank you. Now, when you were in Yuendamu, did those Aboriginal local staff get housing through their employment?
No, they did not.
If local Aboriginal staff were to be able to get housing through their employment, do you think that might assist in attracting and retaining more local Aboriginal staff?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask a couple of more questions about the planning, and I only really ask this for the purposes of lessons learned. But in terms of the planning of the withdrawal, the nuts and bolts of it, do you think it would have helped if prior to the decision there was consideration of what the risks were to the patients, the individual high-risk patients?
I think a lot of lessons to be learned about communication, the risk assessment. Yes.
Yep. And do you think it might have, like in the future, it might have helped that there might be handovers regarding those high-risk patients?
Absolutely. I'm not sure that wasn't done.
Okay. Do you think it would help in the future if there would be consultation between other major stakeholders, such as, say, Purple House or the old age persons programs?
Absolutely. Everybody should have received notification and communication.
And do you think they could have assisted in the contingency planning, like working out for their vulnerable patients that you have in common, working out a plan for those individuals?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right. Now, just going to the Aboriginal local staff that you did have, so that's Nola, Jabberson and Mary. You mentioned before that they weren't in the discussion because their properties weren't affected. To your knowledge, did anyone actually check with them if their properties weren't affected?
Yes, I think they did. Again, I wasn't there on the day, but I understand from staff that they were contacted and they were involved after the meeting.
Just so we can check, do you recall which staff member might have told you that? Just so we might ask them about that.
I don't know specifically, maybe Vanessa, maybe Cassandra and John.
Okay, thank you. Now, at paragraph 63 of your affidavit, you noted non-Aboriginal staff drew upon the knowledge of local Aboriginal staff when navigating cultural norms. Did anyone speak to Nola, Jabberson or Mary when these issues of the break-ins first started occurring for the purposes of trying to resolve the issue?
Yes, definitely. Lots of discussions when they happened and asking them what is the best way for us to go forward or how best way for us to speak with the wider community and elders.
Yep. And so do you recall what their suggestions and advice were?
Yeah, definitely was the community meetings they felt would be the best way to get to a great number of people was by the community meetings.
Okay. And to your knowledge, and I appreciate you were in Alice Springs for a period of time, but after that first break-in on the 6th of November, did anyone again speak to Nola, Jabberson or Mary about their advice and suggestions at that stage?
I didn't myself, no.
Okay. And are you not aware of anyone else?
No.
Okay. Earlier you talked about the doctor in community, Dr. Rossa, I believe. You mentioned that on weekends Dr. Rossa isn't on call. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And just to check, in an ordinary circumstance, if there was an emergency, would she be on call on the weekend? Or would she attend if there was an emergency on the weekend? Or outside the normal clinic time? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. If we called her in an emergency, she would attend, but she wasn't on call.
Okay. And so what's the difference between being not on call and attending an emergency, if you take my meaning? Like, if you were on call,
Then you will attend.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it would be at the request of staff.
Okay, so essentially, if you're not on call, would you say that there's
It's a choice.
a discretion there? Okay.
I
Yes.
guess she could also be out of the community if she chose to be, but if you're on call, then I expect that you'd be required to be available in the community.
Thank you. Do you think if there was a second doctor available in Yuendamu, at least during the time you were there, that it might have been possible to work out a schedule so that a doctor could always remain on call?
That would be great. That would be ideal. And if resourcing allowed, having a doctor on call after hours would be fantastic.
Thank you. Now, with respect to the training, the cultural awareness training that you first received and whatnot back in 2009, does NT Health have a policy to require you to do refresher courses?
I don't believe so. I believe that the Aboriginal Cultural Awareness Program is a one-off.
Thank you. And have you ever been asked by NT Health to do training on unconscious bias?
On unconscious bias?
Yes, that's
Is that what you said?
yes, that is what I said. Yes, unconscious bias.
No.
Okay. Now, at paragraph 60 of your affidavit, you refer to the cultural induction training developed by Jennifer Hampton, who was the then district manager, and Gwen Patterson-Wally. To your knowledge, are either of those persons from Yuendamu themselves?
No, they're not.
Okay. Now, given that they're not from the community, how do you know that their induction was accurate?
They work closely with our Aboriginal staff on how to develop that induction program.
Okay. And so is it possible that, say, Nola, Jabberson or Mary reviewed the document and the induction?
Any discussion around induction was had with our on-staff Aboriginal staff.
Okay. Now, appreciate that you did that induction training yourself, it seems. Is there a specific policy for health that requires staff to take that localised induction, or is this something that you just did at Yuendamu?
No, it is a requirement that all staff undergo a local community induction. However, how that is conducted is not formal.
Okay.
Cultural induction in the community is ongoing, something that you can just do in a week. So community induction is ongoing.
I apologise there for the mid part of your answer. It cut out. Would you mind trying to repeat that again? I know it's a bit tricky to say you don't know when you cut out and you didn't.
That community induction is ongoing. It's not something that you can just do in a couple of days or over a week. So learning about the culture of a community goes on for the length of time that you're in that community. It's not something that you learn and then you just put aside.
Thank you. Just turning to paragraph 30 of your affidavit, you mentioned that there was a natural kinship between, and I apologise for my pronunciation here, Maori people and Aboriginal people.
Yes.
And you also mentioned that there's maybe some cultural similarities there.
Yes.
Now, just for the purposes of letting the court know, you'd accept, wouldn't you, that you're not an expert on, say, Aboriginal culture? Would that be fair to say?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you'd accept, wouldn't you, that while you might have some knowledge of the cultural similarities, ultimately that's no substitute for Aboriginal people determining what is culturally informed practice in healthcare. Would that be fair to say?
Agreed, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, just a couple of last questions. Now, page 28 of your record of interview, you're explaining why every break-in wasn't necessarily reported. And you go on to say, and I'll just quote, because we are very aware that it's difficult for them, many police, to do something with. But, you know, at the time you're thinking, well, no one can do anything about it. Now, you'd accept, wouldn't you, that it'd be equally difficult for elders of the community to stop break-ins as it would be for the police?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
do you think perhaps maybe even given that the police have training to do their jobs and one of their jobs is crime prevention, do you think it possibly might even be harder for elders to be able to try and stop the break-ins?
Agreed. My understanding is that the elders were asked for their advice on how to manage these things. I'm not sure they were any more equipped to give us the answers.
Okay, thank you. But in any case, you would accept that it's difficult. It would be a difficult task for them. Yes. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, my final question is, and this one's a bit tricky because it's a bit unclear on the transcript, but at page 25 of your record of interview, there's a bit of a line there and there's a couple of interjections from the police officer saying and things like that. But I'll just read out to you the part I want to draw your attention to. You say, but I'm saying that post that, a lot of support, a lot of goodwill. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding, miscommunication, that people weren't aware of the reasons. Can I take it from that quote that what you were saying is that the community was understanding of the withdrawal once the reasons were explained?
I think once the information was given to the community as a whole, I think they understood while the nurses were withdrawn.
Okay. So given that a 19-year-old community member died, you'd agree, wouldn't you, that it's pretty considerate of the community to show that level of understanding?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I just missed that.
Sure. So given that a 19-year-old community member had died, you'd agree, wouldn't you, that it was pretty considerate of the community to show that level of understanding?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Yes, Mr. McMahon. I'm just noting the time. I know that we haven't had Mr. Hutton yet, and we've got another witness today, so I'm just making people aware of that fact. But yes, Mr. McMahon. And after your questions, we'll have the lunch break.
Should be between 10 and 15 minutes.
Mr. Hutton, did you want to say something?
Just only that I think if perhaps we could finish this witness before lunch, if that's at all possible, Your Honour.
I don't think so.
All right. I'm not sure how long other parties have, but I certainly won't be long.
About 5 minutes.
All right. Look, we'll see how much we can
Sure.
get through. I'll sit till 1:15, but not longer.
Thank you, Your Honour.
And we'll see if we can get through that. Yes, Mr. McMahon.
So, nurse, you will have seen that I'm going to be under a bit of time pressure, so I'll speak to you quite briskly, and you feel free to answer briskly as well. My name is McMahon, and I for the Parenthood Committee, which is a committee of people from Yuendamu, mostly elders, and you would know quite a few of them from your time meeting there. My questions are ultimately focused on the future, if that will help you as you give your answers. We're looking to how to improve things for the future. Do you understand?
Yes.
Now, I take it from all of the material that is on the brief concerning you, your interview and your statement and so on, that there is some difficulty in having sufficient staff at the Yuendamu Clinic. Would you agree with that?
Agreed. Yes.
And for your whole time that you were there, is that a consistent problem?
No, during my time, we had good staff and good resources.
But did that become an increasing difficulty towards the end of your time there?
Yes.
There's other material on the brief to suggest that Yuendamu Clinic had staff of about 19 or 20, but was funded for staff of about 27. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds right, yes.
And is the reason that there's that gap simply because you couldn't recruit enough people?
Yes.
Now, bearing all of that in mind, you also made a thoughtful comment in your material about the need for flexibility with regard to documentation such as birth certificates and OCA cards. So that's an important point that we want to talk to Ron about later. Can you just zero in on that and explain why there needs to be flexibility with regard to documentation in order to recruit more Aboriginal staff to the clinic?
Yes, we had a lot of community members approach me wanting employment. It was difficult for them to gain enough points through birth certificates, driver's licence, Medicare cards, to get for them to obtain an OCA card, which is required by NT Health. The other thing that was difficult for Aboriginal people was the documents that they had to complete prior to employment. Now, I don't know whether anybody is aware, but there's pages and pages of information that's required. And so they did struggle at times completing just the commencement documents.
Just keep going on that for a moment because no one else is speaking about it that I'm aware of. So tell us what else you can remember about the importance of that document.
Well, just completing, having bank account details, having Medicare details, superannuation, tax file numbers. It was difficult when people weren't used to accessing this information or even knowing where to find them. Setting up a bank account so that wages could be paid into.
And in your experience, was the failure to be able to complete that form adequately a significant impediment to people being employed?
Yes.
Despite the fact that the people we're talking about are people well known to the community who live in the community.
Yes.
And who can undoubtedly produce some of the material.
Yes. One of the other thing was sometimes people had a criminal history which not just prevented them from taking employment, but that they felt that they couldn't even apply because of their criminal history.
So would you agree with the proposition that with regard to a person having a criminal history, the Northern Territory authorities need to take a much greater a much more flexible approach to analysing what that criminal history might amount to before ruling people out of employment?
Absolutely, and it was a very arduous and I am sure somewhat traumatic time for people to have to go through that process.
Are you able to say over a year, any particular year towards the end of your time there, how many people we're talking about who would struggle with these forms, struggle to complete the commencement documents, struggle to provide suitable identification? We're talking about more than one or two, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Much
more than 10.
Yeah. That's in any year, correct?
Yes. Yes, correct.
Which is a significant part of the operation of a clinic the size of the Yuendamu Clinic.
Correct.
I want to ask you a group of questions about having what we've been calling in your absence from my client, a local council, which doesn't exist in the way that it used to at Yuendamu. And you've identified a number of times in your evidence, some answers you've talked about the health advisory group and how you reinvigorated that, and how unfortunately eventually it began to diminish in its effectiveness and only meet as required in special circumstances. You understand that?
Yes.
And elsewhere in your record of interview, which was taken in November 2019, you complain, and I'm not criticising you here, I'm just making the point that you complain that, well, look, there's 1,000 people there, how could we go out and tell 1,000 people that we've got our houses being broken into? How do we communicate with that many people? What's the point of telling a few? Do you remember talking to the police about that?
I don't remember those words.
Yeah, okay, well, take it from me, that's the gist of what's in your record of interview. The point I wish to bring your attention to is, at the time of this crisis on the 9th of November, before the shooting, just the crisis of the medical staff leaving, it's fair to say, isn't it, that there was an absence of a appropriate leadership body of community leaders and emerging leaders to whom you could go and speak and identify the whole range of issues, knowing that that would satisfy community needs.
Correct.
And it follows, doesn't it, you would agree that in circumstances like this and other circumstances where you as a clinic needed to communicate with the whole community, there would be great value in having an appropriate body such as a local council or an embodiment of a local council to whom you could communicate and deliver a whole message. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And
yes.
You'd agree that if you're in such a conversation with such a group, it would be a most appropriate forum for you to hear back from the community about the community's wishes and desires and needs.
Absolutely.
One of the issues which emerges in other people's evidence, and I'm just giving you a chance to comment on it because of the conversations you would have been in on the 9th of November, is the question of what was going to happen at Yuendamu. Now, the issue is this, once a decision is made for Yuendamu clinic staff to leave Yuendamu, that enlivens the role of Yuendamu clinic. You appreciate that?
Yes.
And there's suggestions in the evidence that there was an intention that 2 staff from Yuendamu would end up staying at Yuendamu and provide support to the staff at Yuendamu. You understand that?
I was aware of that after, yes.
And that goes to what Council Assisting was asking you about the mathematical realities that were being imposed on the staff at Yuendamu once that there were no staff at Yuendamu, in terms of the number of people to be cared for, still only by 2 staff at Yuendamu. Now,
yes,
some of the witness statements, they're not necessarily people being called in this inquest, but they've made statements. One is a nurse Elting, and I think the other may be Cassandra Holland. There may be other material. Basically suggests that they were willing to stay on or do extra support. Elting certainly says he was prepared to stay at Yuendamu. Are you able to assist us in explaining why that didn't happen? Why the staff who left Yuendamu and ended up in Alice Springs, why there was no provision of 2 extra staff at Yuendamu?
I was not involved in that decision making that staff would not remain.
All right. Were you aware at the time, Mr. Reeves says in his statement that it was his intention and wish that he wanted staff to go to Yuendamu to support those staff? Were you aware of that on the Saturday the 9th?
No, I wasn't aware. I'm aware of it now, but I wasn't aware of that on the day.
All right. I want to ask you some questions about Congress. Are you aware of Congress? I'm sure Aboriginal Community Health Organisation.
Yes.
I'm afraid I have to admit I haven't studied your CV closely enough to know for sure whether you've worked for Congress, but certainly much of your work has been with Northern Territory Health.
Correct.
Yeah. And
I've not worked for Congress.
Okay. You're aware, of course, that they strongly promote Aboriginal controlled community health centres.
Yes.
Are you able to identify, as someone who has not been involved in that? No, I'll withdraw that question. Would you agree that there are, as Congress would, of course, put forward, that there are many benefits of having Aboriginal controlled community health centres?
Yes.
In the material that's coming into this inquest from Congress, there's a discussion about the number of people at Yuendamu and the number of GPs who should be servicing a community of that size. And it's said that there should be at least 2 GPs in a community of that size. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, I would.
And the benefit of that is that there would be at least one person available at all times without the growing risk of burnout for the GP if there were only to be one GP there.
Correct.
Would you agree that the community control of primary health services, such as is done by Congress, is an excellent model of health service delivery?
I don't know too much about their models of care. I do agree that Aboriginal input is vital with decision making when it comes to health services.
Are you aware of whether, as Congress would say, that there are going to be better health outcomes and improved health gains for Aboriginal people where there is an Aboriginal controlled community health centre?
I would say that partnership with Aboriginal people will have definite benefits.
All right. You're constraining your answers based on your limited experience, and I won't ask you more questions about that.
Yeah.
Just a very quick question, hopefully. In your statement, you talk about the Purple House dialysis service and that the clinic does not share resources with the Purple House, although you share information and communication, of course. Is there any particular stand-up reason why resources aren't shared with Purple House?
Just that we work for different organisations.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
We work for different organisations.
All right. So it's just a question of 2 silos in the same town, is it?
That's correct.
Is that something that could be improved with better management coordination?
I feel that our relationship with Purple House was very good as it was. It can always be improved.
All right. Now, the next couple of questions are in no way a criticism of you, and I know that from watching you all day, you've been deeply moved by many of the questions you've been asked. But I do have to ask you a couple of questions which are troubling me. You've said that that Aboriginal staff are never involved in call-outs after hours, and it wasn't clear to me why that is the case. Are you able to say why that is the case?
So can I understand your question of why our Aboriginal staff didn't attend emergency after hours?
Correct.
Was that correct?
At the time that you were there?
From my perspective, Nola Fisher, senior Aboriginal health practitioner, was nearing the end of her career and didn't participate at all with on-call. Jefferson and Mary, in their roles as Aboriginal community workers, didn't do after-hours care either.
I appreciate you've said that they didn't do it. The question I'm asking is why? Why couldn't they assist other staff from the clinic who are not Aboriginal in after-hours call-outs for emergencies, for instance?
They could if they wished to, and they were asked if they'd like to participate in the after-hours on-call, and declined by both.
Okay, so when you say that they were never involved, you're saying that that was a choice of theirs?
Yes.
There was no direction from on high that Aboriginal health staff were not to be involved in after-hours emergency call-out?
Not at all. In fact, we would encourage it. We sought to get after-hours drivers from within the community, but we didn't have anything forthcoming.
The other question that you asked at a similar time earlier today was about Aboriginal staff having keys, and you said they have never carried keys, which struck me as an odd proposition. Can you elaborate on that answer? What do you mean by saying the Aboriginal staff have never carried keys?
I understood prior to me starting that our Aboriginal staff didn't carry keys to the health centre, and part of it was their own choice. Sometimes it was challenging for them to hold the keys and not lose them, so they tended not to take them. I understand that Nola Fisher did have a health centre key, and at times so did Jefferson.
All right. Two more questions. One of the witnesses who's coming, a nurse, says with regard to leaving on Saturday the 9th that we were hoping we'd be back the next day. She says, we thought it was just going to be like a night thing, show our stand and then come back the next day and go on. Hopefully community got the message that we weren't going to be broken into. Now, you've said in answer to questions from another barrister that you were unaware of what the return plan was. So you can see the two conflicting positions there. One nurse is saying we were coming back the next day, that was her understanding, and you're saying you had no idea. Is that something you can comment on for the court?
I was not involved with any of the contingency planning, how long the staff were going to be in Alice Springs for. I was not involved at any stage. They may have been told, but I wasn't.
Right, I'll leave it there thank you.
I believe
Yes, Ms. Bernard.
next in line, Your Honour.
Good afternoon, Ms. Simons. My name is Amanda Bernard and I appear for the Northern Territory Police Force. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
I'd like to ask you some questions about the phone calls that you had with Sergeant Frost on the evening of the 9th of November. You've just given some evidence about that. It was clear to you in those calls that Sergeant Frost was seeking urgent medical assistance for Kumanjayi Walker, is that right?
That's correct.
In fact, you indicated in your statement that in that second call, she said to you, I need someone now.
Correct.
She wanted the medical plane to be dispatched as soon as possible, is that fair?
That's correct.
You've given some evidence, Ms. Simons, that you told Sergeant Frost that you would contact the Medical Retrieval and Consultation Centre. Did you in fact do that?
Yes, I did. I spoke with Dr. Petra from the MRAC team.
So you told Sergeant Frost that you'd make a call, correct?
Yes.
As soon as you got off the phone with Sergeant Frost, you did make that call.
Yes.
You spoke with Dr. Petra.
Yes.
You gave Dr. Petra Sergeant Frost's phone number.
and then they communicated.
And it was your understanding that they did that, is that right?
That's correct.
Can I ask you some questions about the Medical Retrieval and Consultation Centre generally? That was an emergency service that operated from the Alice Springs Hospital in conjunction with the Royal Flying Doctors Service, is that right?
That's right, yes.
It was a 24-hour service?
Yes,
And the doctors were based at the hospital, but the pilots were provided by RFDS, is that the case?
that's correct, yes.
Had you called them before? Had you had a cause to call the Medical Consultation and Retrieval Service before?
Yes,
They're used for emergencies such as this one, aren't they?
yes,
But is it correct that they're also used for a range of other things, such as the hospital retrievals that you told us about earlier?
yes,
Do they also take patients back to country after they've been in hospital in Alice Springs, for example?
yes,
Do they do transfers between hospitals?
yes,
And do they do other tasks like occasionally transferring health staff to remote communities?
yes, I understand, yep, yes,
Obviously, it takes time, doesn't it, between when contact is made with this service and doctors are actually on the ground in the remote community or wherever they're required. You agree with that?
yes,
And that response time depends on a number of factors, doesn't it, in your experience?
yes,
So it would depend, for example, on where the plane is or a plane is at any given time and what else it might be doing.
yes,
Depends on which planes are available.
yes,
If a plane is available, a team then has to be assembled, ready to go and leave on that plane. Would you agree with that?
yes,
And then on top of that, there's the flight time.
yes,
And then on top of that, there's the trip from the airstrip to the community if the plane is indeed going to a remote community.
yes,
There's some evidence on the brief, Ms. Simons, that it can take up to 2 hours from an initial incident to doctors being on the ground if this service is utilised. Would you agree with that assessment?
Look, I'm not too sure on the prioritising of patients and the time it takes for doctors to get from A to B.
Okay, but in your experience when you've utilised this service before, it doesn't happen immediately, does it? It takes time.
They're prioritised, yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Simons. Those are the matters, Your Honour.
Just before you go, but I'm going to let you, Mr. Hutton. Are there qualified nursing staff, to your knowledge, attached to Purple House or the aged care?
Registered nurses in the renal department at Purple House, yes. And aged care is enrolled nurses.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Hutton.
I don't have any questions, Your Honour. Thank you.
Does that complete all the examination? Thank you very much for making yourself available. I am sorry that we had to interrupt your time on holidays, or I assume it's holidays, and perhaps visiting family. I'm sure that it has been a significant interruption, not just the time that you've allocated today, but the thought that has gone into it and the anticipation. And I very much appreciate you making yourself available to answer the questions, and we appreciate the information that you've provided to the inquest. It's important information. We'll adjourn for lunch. And we'll